Good morning, everyone. We will continue with our program. Thank you very much for all the speakers that came before and for the inspiring words. We will kick off a session on the social dimension of European sovereignty. I would like to welcome on stage the Secretary General of FEPS and also former commissioner. We have a full house of commissioners and former commissioners of social rights, Laszlo Andor. Thank you very much, Laszlo.
Thank you very much. Dear friends, colleagues, it has been fascinating to listen to the introductory speeches, which provided the political framing of the conference. Now I would like to present to you the essential points of a study which we authored with a younger colleague of mine, Robin Huguenon-Noël, under the title European Sovereignty and the Social Dimension. And it's really a great pleasure that friends and colleagues thought that indeed this should be a critical point of the discussion today. Why? Because since the original Porto Summit 5 years ago, one major change happened. Because of wars, because of the global disruption, everything today is now geopoliticized. And everything needs to be interpreted in this geopolitical framing. And for some people, the geopolitics is an excuse to sideline other questions like social policy or environmental policy. We believe that the opposite should be the case. The geopolitical developments provide a new context, a new perspective to social policy, but contrary to the stereotypes, indeed we would need to make this connection much stronger. In the paper which we published first in English, but now on the FEPS website, you also find a Portuguese language translation. We present 3 core arguments to support the link between European sovereignty, on the other hand, and the EU social dimension. First, we believe that European sovereignty is fundamentally about defining and defending Europe's own model, which is based on our values, rules, and distinct sources of political legitimacy and social cohesion. And the point number 2, to be strong outside, Europe also needs to be solid inside by building the EU capacity to weather crises, whether these are wars of aggression or economic warfare or economic shocks, financial disruption. This needs to be responded with resilience and without sacrificing the core values. And point number 3, we believe that the true sovereignty demands a democratic political control over market power. The EU must reaffirm its regulatory tradition of supporting and preserving high-quality social services in face of predatory firms. A lot of people now, also in the recent days, spoke through the lens of securitization when it comes to migration, the migration of people. For some, it's a kind of obsession. And there is a lot of xenophobia coming through this debate occasionally. But when it comes to a legitimate part of this debate, we have to apply the legitimate part of it also to the migration of companies. What companies and under what conditions can operate in our single market, we have to be able to determine these conditions and set and enforce the rules. Now, the next point which we elaborate on this paper is the transatlantic comparison when it comes to the social model and the social outcomes. There is now indeed a new debate as a result of the transatlantic crisis about the American and the European social models. Not only the economic performance is now assessed through the context of geopolitics, but also the social one, about inequality, social rights, crisis response, capacities, and so on and so forth. Now, on most accounts, I think we should proudly say that Europe comes out very well in comparison with the United States. There are some well-known aspects and there are some less well-known aspects of this. I think it is very well known that European life expectancy is longer, European health performance is better, out of much less resources. So the profit burden on the health sector in the United States is enormous and delivers much less. Europeans live longer, despite the Americans having much more sunshine. Maybe you don't often think about this this way, but the sunshine and the life expectancy are somewhat connected. In Europe, the country with the most sunshine has the longest life expectancy, but somehow our American friends fail to capitalize on this enormous asset. But if you look at other indicators, including poverty, Europe is doing better, and we could continue with further indicators, for example, workplace fatalities. Workplace fatality, proportionately speaking, is almost twice as much in the United States as in the European Union countries. Very importantly, Europe performs much better in terms of gender equality, in general terms, but also when it comes to the labor market. The female employment rate in the EU is close to 71%, while in the United States is 57%. And I think it's well known that the United States never enacted the right to paid maternity leave. Where, on the other hand, the US is doing better is that in the United States of America, there is a strong federal fiscal policy with the function of economic but also social stabilization. Effective transfers between the member states are taken for granted, and everybody knows that the system could not function in any other way. A federal unemployment insurance has existed since 1935, the Social Security Act of Franklin Roosevelt. So what the EU can, and in my view should learn from the United States, is the ability to back up the welfare state by a genuine federal economic firepower. When it comes to the indicators, of course, the point is not just to sit on our laurels, knowing that we do better than the United States. The European Union has developed a capacity, and I would say a tradition, to set the ambition higher and higher. Ever since the Lisbon strategy of 2000, the Europe 2020 strategy 2010, and the Porto Action Plan 2021, there has been a regular rendezvous with the numerical objectives to improve economic, employment, but also social outcomes. As it has already been quoted by previous speakers, the Porto Action Plan aimed at the reduction of at least 15 million people in the number of those at risk of poverty or social exclusion. And there is an ambition to raise the employment rate up to 78%. If the question is what progress is being made, I think we can say that on employment, the progress is relatively good, and there is a good chance to reach the target. On poverty, the question remains open. What else can be done? What needs to be mobilized in order to ensure that the dynamics improve, and by the end of the decade, we can arrive where the decision makers in Porto wanted to see the improvements. It's also a tradition not only to set targets, but also to add new tools. If the available tools are not sufficient to deliver on the targets, it's always possible to invent new tools to add something to the arsenal. An example, again, already mentioned, the EU action to protect adequate minimum wages is indeed a new development. Previously, this topic was excluded from the competencies of the European Union, but we can rest assured that this enjoys the support of the Europeans. This chart is about the public support for EU engagement in wage setting, and it shows that only about 25% on the right side, which is opposed to the EU involvement in wage setting, and it cannot be just the Danish. First of all, because this comes from the Eurozone, and Danish only represent 1% of the European population. But the big majority, one way or another, does support the EU taking care of wage dynamic and expects to be a part of the solution rather than a part of the problem in this field. When the EU minimum wage directive was created, I think we can call it a kind of golden age of European social policy, with a number of further additions to the toolkit. The SURE instrument was created against the COVID-19 recession. The youth guarantee was reinforced. A similar initiative was born to support children. The European Social Fund became an ESF Plus, and the Commission provided further support to develop and boost the social economy sector. So there's a lot of progress which has been made, and indeed the question is where it is leading to. In the recent years, there was a lot of talk about the European Social Union. In these years, I think this discussion is a little bit more part of the academia, not so much in the policy community. But you must have heard it from distinguished thinkers and policymakers like Frank van den Broeke, Colin Crouch, Maurizio Ferreira, that if we continue reinforcing the EU social policy, then we will be able to use this expression, social union. In the last 15 years, we heard about the banking union, occasionally a fiscal union, energy union, security union, all different types of unions. So the question obviously is there, why not a social union? This chart is coming from a younger researcher, Ilaria Maselli, who was indeed explaining the evolution of the EU social dimension from the left side, where everything was just national competence, the middle stage, when the EU started to play a significant coordinating role and set minimum standards, and a possible area of arrival when the EU provides material support and guarantees. The concept of the guarantee is a critical one. We heard about the proposal for skills guarantee, and indeed the European Union basically providing safety nets to the national safety nets is the logic which we would need to apply here. And in that case, we can, of course, speak about a social union as well. Our conclusions are summed up in a proposal of a few priorities. If we would like to make this connection between the geopolitical argument and the further development of social policy, and just like the previous speaker from the trade union was emphasizing, social policy cannot be separated from economics. The EU should not treat social policy as a distinct field, but rather drive the economy with a social compass. The world economic changes underlie this strongly, and this is not an entirely new idea. When it was understood that globalization in the 1990s had a lot of disruptive effects, also in the labor markets and the structures of industry, the EU response was to invent the Globalization Adjustment Fund. I think it was coming from indeed a good analysis, but now with the global rupture, the transatlantic crisis, a lot of economic warfare, sanctions, 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 of course the scale of the disruption is much greater than in the 1990s. Sometimes there is a lot of volatility. Just look at the last spring period. So the stabilization capacity on the social side would indeed need to be somehow restored, reinvented. If we want to deliver on the long-term objectives outlined in Porto 5 years ago, I believe we can only succeed if indeed the economic policy path is corrected, but also connected better with the social objectives. Indeed, the problem is that when it comes to the economic policy, the incumbent EU leadership has failed to articulate a vision of a desirable future and opted instead what we call a Draghi light agenda, taking the side of the Draghi Report, which is about the deregulation and simplification, but not making progress on the very important part of the Draghi Report, which is building a common fiscal capacity to support investment and innovation. What Europe needs instead is a new socio-economic steering agenda. That's what we are arguing for, in order to promote the social democratic objectives as a core element of the sovereignty ambition. A strategically autonomous Europe requires not only re-industrialization, but also re-socialization. So in our roadmap for Porto, the key points you can see on the right side, building the EU borrowing capacity, which until now only was an option in emergency situation. But also without the emergency, this would need to be strongly considered. Connecting the economic steering with the social rights, also for the strategic use of public procurement, rooted in high social and environmental standards, which has a lot of potential, restoring the support to public services at local and regional levels, which requires an empowerment of these regional and local actors, and repositioning the social targets at the heart of the European integration agenda and not just to the margins. All this is also connected with the reduction of European dependencies on the US. We often highlight the European dependency in defense, finance, digital services, and now also energy. But I think there is also a problem of the mental dependency, that there is a lot of inferiority complex when it comes to the economic performance, when it comes to other aspects of life, but the European integration cannot be built from an inferiority complex. Europe needs to appreciate its own assets, its own capacities, its own potential, and if we become better integrated in all aspects, the EU can remain a major industrial and regulatory power anchored in highly educated and skilled population, rooted in market economies that provide a foundation for long-term investment and growth. All this will need EU policy to also include stronger collective fiscal capacity and uphold the regulatory autonomy. By developing the social pillar of the sovereignty agenda, the Union would show that European citizens, it cares not only about the external power, but also the everyday concerns of the citizens, and put the legitimacy of the integration into a new foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. I would invite you to sit and join us for the panel. And coming from a sunshine state and with being blessed by a sunshine exceptional day in Porto, I hope this reinvigorates our debate. I would also welcome on stage Elisa Ferreira. I think she dismisses several a long introduction, but I still would like to mention that she served as the European Commissioner for Cohesion and Reforms from 2019 to 2024, where she oversaw the EU cohesion funds and the Just Transition Fund, with a particular focus on supporting regions most affected by the digital and green transitions. Before that, she also represented Portugal on the Single Supervisory Mechanisms Supervisory Board at the European Central Bank, and served as Vice Governor of Banco de Portugal, of the Portuguese Central Bank. I will not go further into your resume, otherwise we will not have enough time. And joining us online, we have Monica Vidal, who is a Senior Built Environment Campaigner at Climate Action Network. And prior to joining CAN Europe, Monica worked for the Spanish NGO ECODES, advocating for ambitious policies to decarbonize Spain's building sector, while also working to lift millions of people out of energy. She also served as a board member of the European Environmental Bureau between 2017 and 2020. So without further ado, I would like to just set the scene, and then, of course, give the stage to the speakers with the reason why we are here. But I would like to mention that we have heard a lot of references to Jacques Delors, and I remember particularly the former Commissioner Nicolas Schmit in his final speech in the Parliament mentioning that Europe will be social or it will not be. But I would like also to refer to another quote from Jacques Delors that I think could help us guide the discussion and could perhaps influence how we think about social policies. And he mentioned, how can we ever build Europe if young people do not see it as a collective project and a vision for their own future? And the panel that we have today is on the social dimension on European sovereignty. And I think we have all been discussing a lot on the topics of sovereignty, strategic autonomy in Europe. And paradoxically, social dimension, or at least the social application of the social policies, still remain widely under national sovereignty, while at the same time, it is an area of heavy interference for macroeconomical, and I would add sometimes ideological purposes. At the same time, social dimension is, I believe, and I think we have heard this extensively today and also yesterday, the social dimension is really what makes the EU truly unique. I often say that Europe is the only continent that still believes that the world is Eurocentric, but Europe is no longer the economic, military, and to some extent diplomatic power that it used to be, but it still is a social world power. And the social dimension still remains one of its biggest assets, if not the biggest. So hindering the social dimension could be Europe's shooting itself in the foot. Dear Elisa, as a former European Commissioner for Cohesion and Reforms, what role do you see for cohesion policy and the overall objective of economic, territorial and social cohesion in contributing to European sovereignty?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for this meeting. I think Europe needs this political force that is, for me, obvious. We need to work together, and I'm very glad to be here and to celebrate what needs really a celebration, because the world is becoming too complex, too dangerous. It's perceived by the citizens as something, a big machine where no one is controlling, and this creates a sense of artificial attachment to whoever comes in and says, I save you, I have a solution for you, and we never find what kind of solution they are talking about. So populism is growing, and I think fear, instability, lack of control on your own life is the ground on which populism works and grows. So no country is immune, even Portugal, that for a long time seemed to be outside this kind of influence, now is capable of refusing or rejecting the presence of these forces. And I think Europe is also seen internationally, and a lot of speakers before have mentioned this. Europe is still seen from the outside world as the place where you would like to live. Roxana in particular mentioned this. People who look at us as the materialization of an utopia of having growth, economic growth, personal freedom, political freedom, and so I think this is the reason why so many international forces are now putting their target on destroying Europe. Destroying from outside, destroying from inside, and it has become a crime to want to belong to this European project. The European project, however, is not an economic project, it is a political project. It is the intelligent European response to the most dramatic and violent destruction and war that Europe had ever had. And it is this political area that I think needs to be put again in the center of our agenda, because it is the economy that is more visible, but it is the economy that was chosen to make sure that the mechanisms of the market and the mechanisms of the budget and all this would keep us politically together. But we have got to deliver politically. We have got to deliver a good quality of life and good capacity of, we have got to create a space. I would kind of put it, and Nicholas Schmidt, sorry, Nico, he was mentioning that we leave no one behind. I think this is at the core of the agenda. But to the other side of it, look at each of the citizens that now lives in Europe, and from their shoes, let's see how each citizen perceives if there is a place for him or her in Europe, or if the system doesn't have a place for him. Because this is what creates the sense of rejection. And if the system doesn't have a place for me, I hate the system. I want to destroy it. I don't care. So this kind of feeling is being felt by too many people now. So when we talk about social rights, we also have to put them together with the economic capacity for you to grow with your knowledge, your assets, your human assets. And this is what also Ludovic was saying, that the social and the economy have got to be together. But I would add that the economy and the geography where things occur also has to be together. And what I see now is this over-reliance on the text by Mario Draghi, which I think is very interesting. It comes together with the text by Enrico Letta. Enrico Letta was wise enough to make a reference to the places that are left behind and to the right to stay. And I think we need also to force a new assessment of the recommendations of Draghi that I think has very nice, is a very bright, a very intelligent European, but I think we need to reinterpret this recommendation, taking into account how the different areas of Europe are going to be able and to have the means to be part of this competitive agenda that I agree we have got to develop. But even yesterday we could understand that if we don't put a political filter in the agenda, we may end up with an over-concentration of funds and opportunities in the already developed areas of Europe, with the rest of the territories being actually and practically left behind. And the kind of proposal that I see now for the future of the MFF doesn't create any sense of comfort to me. Because if you leave behind where things happen in the territory, there is no way you can solve the social agenda without looking at what are the opportunities you are offering to the different territories. So I would put again things upside down, and I would say that we have got to create the conditions for every territory in Europe being able, that means all the people that are there, being able to contribute to the overall welfare of Europe. If we don't do this now, Europe as a political project doesn't matter what the economy does, because it will fragment, it will be destroyed, and will be playing the role of those that are the enemies of Europe and that are afraid of our capacity to deliver a dream, an utopia, but something that has created stability in Europe during, 8 years. So this is a moment to celebrate, of course, celebrate what we have done 5 years ago. Also, it is a moment to celebrate, or last year, to celebrate 80 years after the end of the Second World War, and to celebrate the intelligence of the fathers of Europe to make a proposal after the war that is not I win, you lose. It is, okay, let's settle, let's sit together, let's organize ourselves, and let's create a new framework and a new model. And probably Europe has the capacity also to suggest something internationally of this kind, bearing in mind and taking into account that the values, the criteria, the partners, the actors are not the same as they were in 1945. They are different, but nevertheless, the core values of our agenda, human beings, are still and have got to remain at the center of our agenda, and human beings deserve that the Social Democrats come forward and make very sound and clear proposals that include a new approach to our old but still absolutely relevant and vital values.
Thank you very much, Elisa. Monica, I hope you can hear us and everything is well with the connection. Elisa mentioned several of the challenges that we have, namely in terms of the national inequalities and imbalances and regional imbalances that still persist in Europe. You work on climate issues and environmental issues. I think there is a dimension also on the environmental part and the sustainability part where these inequalities are also very visible. My question to you would be, defining the social dimension of European sovereignty cannot be understood without sustainability and environmental protection in mind. How do you bridge these two?
I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for having me here, and also for having the opportunity also to represent the climate movement also in the room and in this debate, representing Can Europe, Climate Action Network Europe. And for answering your question, Joao, I think let me share with you a visit that we made last week as part of the Build Better Lives campaign that we coordinate at Can Europe. In this, I will be very brief, but we went to Orcasitas. It's a neighborhood in the south of Madrid, working class neighborhood, buildings from the 50s, late 50s, 60s. And we met Manuela Navarro, one of the residents. In winter, the maximum temperature she could reach in her apartment with the heating on was 15 degrees. And in summer, her home became a heat trap, worsening health conditions, and she was already managing. Of course, this situation is not something new for you and for people also in Portugal, in Spain, but also it's not exceptional and it's replicated across Europe in millions of homes, disproportionately affecting working class and low-income communities, disproportionately affecting older residents and among people who had the least part in creating the climate crisis and bear the heavy cost of it. But also Orcasitas is an example and can show us the way through. In 8 years, 90 buildings blocks were fully renovated. Heating bills fell by 80% and CO2 emissions dropped by 58%. There were like very big blocks with 10 floors each, so more than 2,000 families benefits from this. So that's for me and for Can Europe, that is where the social dimension of European sovereignty on the environmental protection stop being two separate conversations and become only one. European sovereignty means people have real control over their lives, their homes, their bills, their health, and their future. And we cannot deliver that while remaining dependent on fossil fuels that drive up prices and warm the planet. We cannot deliver it through a green transition either that leaves people behind. We need to put people at the center. So for us, for answer your question, climate justice is the bridge. And it means the green transition must be designed to reach the people who need it most first, not eventually, not as a residential benefit, but as explicit goal. And buildings renovation, rooftop solars, passive cooling, clean energy, they are not just decarbonization tools, but also can be instruments for resilience and for dignity.
Thank you. Elisa, we are in a moment where we have been having strong discussions about strategic autonomy, and those discussions several times delve around the idea of rearmament and defense spending and how much we need to invest on this. And I think this is something that we can all agree, but at the same time, there have been some voices that have defended that this could be done at the expense of some of the cohesion funds and of some of the cohesion policies that Europe has been having for several decades, and which I believe are part of the core of the European identity and the European project. With this expectation that there is a possibility for cohesion policy to be diluted in national and regional partnership plans in the next MFF, in the next multi-annual financial framework, do you think that there is a possibility that this will hinder social progress in Europe? How do you see this possibility?
Well, I think it's, I mean, whatever you do with the public policies, European public policies in Europe, you need to bear in mind what are your targets. And for a long time, and I praise you for having recalled the basic argument of Jacques Delors, because, and the Secretary General was referring to it, as we increase competition among countries or among regions, you need to reinforce the capacity to compete. And this worked for a long time and was not questioned inside Europe as the two sides of the same coin. So if you want to have public policies that bring forward the value added of the whole, you have got to keep in your mind the contribution of the different pieces and the different regions for this objective, for this target. Somehow, in recent years, this has been lost. And there is a certain imbalance between the need to be competitive and the need to guarantee that there is a place for everybody. And the second line is disguised, because when you say, okay, now I give up asking the regions of Europe to build their own long-term strategy and to finance this long-term strategy with some support so that each of them can interpret the objective of being more modern, more technological, more AI, more whatever, but each region has got to be able to find its own way to make its contribution. If we lose this as in our political agenda, we end up with all the investment that really matters for the future in terms of AI, in terms of high technology, in terms of biotechnology. And yesterday with Andrés Rodrigues Pozo saw it very well, that there are certain areas in Europe that have already this capacity. So concentrating now all our investment into trying to foster these already developed areas without caring about the other areas around is absolutely dramatic for the future of Europe, because the expectation on spillovers doesn't work like that. The spillovers go, yes, they can exist if there are public policies that guarantee spillovers. But if the public policies don't guarantee that a project of top quality of horizon has an extra support, if it connects, if it creates a network, if it brings in other universities from other parts of Europe, if each university is not supported in terms of bringing in all the economy that is around it, and if the instruments, if the public policies do not take these aspects into account, then we are bound to have massive fragmentation across Europe, with people moving. They were voting with their feet. They are, particularly in Southern Europe, the big cities are suffering from very strong diseconomies of agglomeration, and the quality of life around the big cities is absolutely dramatic. People cannot afford, with low payments, to pay the cost of living in these big areas, housing, transports, education, and so they end up being against the system because frustration is immense. And on the other hand, you have in the inside or outside these big centers, you have areas that feel absolutely forgotten by everybody and where you don't find a future for yourself. So you stagnate, you educate your children, then your children have got to go away because they cannot find a job. So if we don't think about a multipolar kind of development in Europe, and if we don't have the public policies fine-tuned in order to deliver these results, we end up with the big metropolis where everybody has a terrible quality of life, and this creates a lot of frustration and a lot of incapacity to have a future because you cannot afford the cost of living of these agglomerations with the wages that are paid. So I think you need to be intelligent, and cohesion has got to stay there, but also we have got to fine-tune the policy in order to give appropriate answers to the different situations. If I can, I know that I should stop, but I visited all the countries in Europe when I was a commissioner, and also when we interpret these European agendas that are very correct, like environment and all that, there are countries in Europe where we still have to build roads. Forget about not building roads. I mean, in Bulgaria, in Romania, there are lots of countries, the inside of some countries, you still need to invest in roads because otherwise you cannot function economically. But in other countries that already have the basic infrastructures reasonably done, we have got to be flexible enough to move into sophisticated infrastructures of technological nature and laboratories and all that. This does mean that in Romania you only do roads. We have got to do roads and you have got to do technology. You have got to do both things. But you have got to adapt to the coal areas. If you look at the transition in the coal areas, you need to support this transition. That's what we did with the Just Transition Fund. If we have a crisis, and Nico and myself, we were reprogramming on top of SURE, we're reprogramming the cohesion fund and the social fund in order to respond to the need of the COVID and to support the economy, prolonging the impact of SURE. And we did about 10% or 13% of reprogramming of our funds to answer this. So we need to be flexible, but to recognize that a rural area in the mountain needs a different agenda from an industrial area in transition or from an area that has to adapt from carbon engine motor industry into electric industry. So we have got to be able to adapt, and this requires a lot of preparation from the bottom up and a lot of attention to the preparation and help to civil servants. I'm sorry to say this, I was for a long time a civil servant, and I think we are asking the public administration to do everything. Now they do environment, now they do gender balance, now they have got to do artificial intelligence, and they are always the same. They don't have any vision for the progress of their career, and so we need to address very seriously in Europe the quality of the civil servants and the quality of governance, including the regional level, to have a scale when we prepare an agenda.
Thank you very much. I think you touched upon two important points. One is that we have seen enough of the lack of efficiency of spillover effects. We saw that also in the financial crisis. But also I think it's important sometimes to reshape the debate on regional imbalances, because we often see it from the perspective of the peripheral countries such as Portugal. We are used to have these debates, but it's also to also focus on the impacts that it can have on the more developed countries and how it can also affect them. So I think you put it very well. Monica, for your final intervention, I would ask, how do you see the connection between the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights and the work that you do at the Climate Action Network and your strong advocacy agenda, particularly in a time where the sustainability issues and the environmental agenda that was put forward in the previous in von der Leyen 1, let's put it like that, is now sometimes being dismissed or at least threatened to a large extent by some forces in Europe?
For your question. Well, we are all facing that in just 4 years, Europe is contending with another energy crisis, and brought on by our dependency also on fossil fuels. So, but also at the same time, Europe is the fastest warming continent on Earth, with record-breaking temperatures years after years. I'm joining from Spain, where we are reaching 37 degrees today. And so I think these are not two separate crises. No, they share a cost, and they fall hardest on the same people. So as electricity prices remain high and households living in poor quality homes are particularly exposed, many Europeans cannot afford to cool their homes in summer, cannot afford to heat them in winter. So the trend also of summer energy poverty is rising sharply, and it will continue to do so unless we act. And this is precisely where can Europe's advocacy connect with the European Pillar of Social Rights, because the social pillar of social rights talks about to guarantee access to essential services, including energy and home, and but a right to energy also means nothing if your home cannot hold heat in January or keep you safe enough for the 40 degrees heat wave as we are experiencing in Spain this week. So what do we push for? In the short term, of course, we need to reduce electricity taxes. We need to protect people and citizens. But in the medium term, also what we need is like the full implementation of the Energy Performance Buildings Directive and the national renovation plans that center vulnerable households first, not as an afterthought. But also in the long term, what we need is a clear gas exit strategy, also that need to be part of the Europe's energy security framework. And also what we need is ambitious efficiency and renewable targets that need to be included also in the upcoming revision of the governance regulation. Because until we address these root cause, so fossil fuel dependency, we are just managing the symptoms, but not solving the problem. And the people paying the price of the delay are always the same. Those with the less capacity to absorb the shock in the worst quality homes in the most exposed communities. So climate justice cannot be just a closing paragraph in a policy document. It has to be there, as a starting point.
We are running short of time, but I will still give you one last minute, 30 seconds to 1 minute, very brief for your final comments to conclude this panel. Also asking for the understanding of the audience, because we will not have much time for questions, but there will be time for mingling and networking outside, so you can pose the questions afterwards. So Elisa, one minute.
Okay, I would say that if it is true that there is an opportunity in each crisis, I would say that this crisis has shaken up Europe, but we moved away from this past philosophy that the United States would look after our defense policy, China would look after our industrial policy, and this kind of comfort zone. But waking up and reorganizing ourselves, we have got to make sure that we keep united which requires conditions to be united economically and politically, but also that the European Union is still the big trader in the world. So there are some areas and some sectors that have been completely globalized, and we need another kind of philosophy and agreement. And Europe may have an important role in that context. Of course, touching upon, and just for example, it's impossible to manage alone trade, to manage alone or in isolation the financial sector, to manage alone and in isolation health, to manage defense, to manage AI, to manage environment. So Europe probably is the right actor to reestablish all these years after a new framework with new partners. Of course, now it's not just the United States and Europe. It has to include, of course, China. It has to include the BRICS. But probably Europe has an international role, and the emptiness that we are facing should probably suggest that we speak with António Guterres and ask him what the vision of a future international order can be and what role Europe can play in that context, because we need it. And hopefully before we all start a global fight, we don't need to go back to what happened in the Second World War before we re-established the new framework. It lasted, but it doesn't last forever.
Muito obrigado. Thank you very much. Monica, the same to you. Just 30 seconds, 1 minute.
So maybe I can focus that the example that I brought today to the discussion from Madrid didn't happen by accident either. So it happened because people, residents organized, and also because public investment was made available. But what we need also, we have in Europe, we have the framework, we have the EPBD, we have the social climate funds, we have the pillars of social rights, so what we need is the question is whenever the ambition matches the urgency, and whatever the most households are centered in the implementation. So at Plan Europe, we believe that the green transition only succeeds if it's built with people.
Comment, if you want.
If I'm heard, yes, I think a lot of people say that Europe's greatest asset is the single market, which probably is true if we appreciate that through a well-functioning single market, Europe also exports a lot of regulation and also demonstrates its own values to the rest of the world. But in order to have this single market well functioning, I think it's important to understand that it doesn't mean laissez-faire. The single market means that we collectively regulate and ensure that somebody also takes care of the aggregate demand, somebody also takes care of the distribution of the opportunities across regions. There's one element which has been frequently discussed in the last 2 years after the Letta report, the so-called right to stay. But people don't give enough thought to what is the right to stay. It also means that prosperity has to be experienced in all different corners of the European Union, so that people want to stay also in countries and regions which have been lagging behind. So without that, we cannot speak about a genuine single market based on the European values.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to everyone that stayed with us for this panel. We will continue very shortly.